Hi, my name is Brett C. Nelson. I'm a PhD candidate in linguistics at the University of Calgary. And this talk, entitled Does That Sound Round to You? Generalized Posteriorization of English Alveolars Before Approximants, will be presented at Alberta Conference on Linguistics 2021. Before I start, however, I'd like to acknowledge that I speak to you today from the area where the Bow and Elbow rivers meet in southern Alberta, a place known in Blackfoot as Mohkinstsis, a name now used to refer to the city of Calgary. This land lies within the territory of Treaty 7, which was signed by this land's stewards, who are representatives of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda. Additionally, this land is home to speakers of Cree and Tunaha, as well as members of the Métis Nation of Alberta. I'm a newcomer to this land. I come from Bobancha, the land of many tongues at the mouth of the Mississippi, otherwise known as New Orleans. I strive to learn more about the land, its peoples, their languages, and their history every day. So I know it's bright and early, so you might not have had your coffee. So if you just want to know what this talk's results are, I'll start with those. So what I noted is that for some speakers, there's an expansion of the distribution of posterior allophones of T, D, and S. So this has been happening in North American English, where posterior allophones are typically occurring before R. However, I've noticed that some speakers of North American Englishes have them before W as well. And so what I propose for these speakers is that they have developed a unified sound change for both of these sequences, where anterior coronal obstruents T, D, and S become posterior and strident before R and W. The cause for this, I propose, is the presence of coarticulation of rounding caused by those R and W phonemes. So this paper has to do with allophony, and particularly the allophony of English. It started by looking at just how weird it is that the English phoneme t, the alveolar stop, doesn't often surface as an alveolar stop, a plain one. Sometimes it's aspirated, like t. So the word team, in which it occurs in the onset of a stressed syllable, so many speakers aspirate the stop there. Some speakers glottalize T, particularly at the ends of words. So a word like but becoming but. So the T is instead an ejective. Some varieties of English have another type of glottalization where T becomes a glottal stop. So in a word like bottle becoming bottle, that's very typical of Southern England. And so this occurs between stressed and unstressed vowels. However, in North America, this very environment instead causes the T to be flapped. So the word bottle is bottle. And this occurs between stressed and unstressed vowels. However, this paper focuses on the posterior affricate allophone of T, which I'll transcribe as the affricate ch. So this occurs in onset and medial onset position in a word like betray. And so before R in onset clusters, Smith et al. Have noted that this stop, the alveolar stop, becomes a posterior affricate. So we've seen what T does. We can expand that a little by looking at all of the coronal obstruents of English. So English has 8 alveolar and palatoalveolar obstruent phonemes. 2 of these are stops, t and da. 2 of these are affricates, ch and ja. And 4 of these are fricatives, sa, za, sh, and ja. However, only 3 of these regularly participate in onset clusters. These are the voiceless alveolar fricative sa and the 2 alveolar stops, t and da. So when they do participate in clusters, it's typically before, it doesn't have to be, but it's typically before an approximant. And this is most frequently seen with the rhotic ra. So in a word, in some examples, with T appearing before R, we have tree, Trudeau, trump, and trolley. So if you hear that, it's a very posteriorized and affricated t, which I would transcribe as ch. The same thing happens for the voiced or linus stop, duh, and dream, drone, drool, and draw, in which the D becomes the voiced affricate j. And then there's S. S doesn't typically appear with R on its own. There's a single lone word where S appears before R, and it happens to be pronounced as a posterior fricative sh in shri. It may appear in clusters with R with an intermediate stop, and when this stop is also a coronal obstruent, we have the change also taking place. So we have streak, stroll, and strudel. We have the posterior fricative sh rather than the anterior fricative. However, these coronal obstruents, these the ta, da, and sa, may also appear in onset clusters before with W. So we get words like between, where it's a medial onset, or initial onset, like in Twitter 20, where it's a very much a stop. This also happens with the voiced or lena stop in dweeb, dwindle, dwane, and dwarf. And S also participates in clusters with W. So we have swing, swan, swung, and swoon. However, it's been for about a year now, I've noticed that there are quite a few speakers who don't have a stop or a anterior allophone of the anterior obstruents there. Instead, they have something else. So we have some examples here.
Between.
So we have the word between being pronounced as between. And so here is a spectrogram and waveform of that. You see it's very noisy and very long, even for a stop. And you could, if you can see the formants, they are a bit raised as if to indicate a bit of rounding as well during the ta, the schwa. Here's another speaker saying twist.
Twist.
And again, we see it's very long, and there's formants forming during the pronunciation of the obstruent that indicate rounding.
Twin.
Here's some other examples. So here's the speaker saying twins.
Twins.
As twins.
Between.
And between as between.
Between.
This also happens again with the voiced or lena stop, not surfacing as a stop, but instead
Dwayne.
an affricate. So here we have the name Dwayne. We see that the formants forming during the noise portion of the affricate. So it seems this is a rounded affricate. Next, we have the same speaker with another word.
Dwebble.
Again, there's formants forming during the noise of the affricate, and it's way more noisy than you'd expect for a voiced or lena stop in English. And then if we have our fricative SW sequences, as we saw with swing or swang, swan, here's a speaker who doesn't have an S there. Instead, they have a
swings,
an esh, the sh. So we see it, there's less rounding there, but a lot more noise than you'd expect even for an S. So what I've shown here is that these speakers have their alveolars becoming palato-alveolars in particular environments. So what's causing this? Well, it's the presence of W, W, and R, R, following those obstruents. So this could be explained as an effect of aspiration, which is possible for the ta and the sa, which could carry aspiration cues. But it's not possible for da, which typically doesn't carry aspiration when it's pronounced in English. So what's up specifically with wa and ra? Well, they're both approximants, so that's possible. Palatalization also occurs with most stops before ya. However, this also tends to lead to coalescence, where these combine into a single segment. However, this doesn't occur before the other approximant in English, la, and this is because la is less likely to appear in clusters with ta, da, and sa. Maybe s, but not ta and da. So the general explanation of approximants causing this doesn't seem to be as likely as my preferred explanation, which is rounding. So wa and ra involve lip rounding in English. Rounding is not a contrastive feature in English. Instead, it is a phonetic cue which accompanies other features of the contrastive features in English. And so this is formulated by enhancement theory, which is proposed by Kaiser and Stevens, 2006, in which gestures are said to accompany all distinctive features when they're pronounced at the surface. However, some of these gestures may not be sufficiently salient. In these cases, second gestures are recruited and introduced and pronounced in order to reinforce that saliency between the distinctive features and the segments. So this has been said to be the case for rounding in English, in which lip rounding is used to enhance the back feature of vowels and glides. So oo, o, and w all involve some level of lip rounding in English when they're pronounced. And this also, rounding is also used to enhance minus anterior or posterior consonants. So again, involving consonants involving the tongue and the back of the mouth or the back of the palate. And so typical pronunciations of minus anterior consonants like sh, ch, zh, j, and r all involve some level of lip rounding, again, as an enhancement cue. Another aspect of lip rounding is that it likes to spread. It's easily co-articulated during other consonants or vowels. So the co-articulation of a rounded approximant during preceding obstruents is in fact one of the proposed explanations for the general posteriorization of T before R in words like tree and Trudeau in most speakers of North American English. So the question is, can the rounding of W also spread? Well, yeah, we just heard them and I just showed you. There was some co-articulation of rounding occurring in the noise portion of those obstruents. And so what I believe is happening here for these speakers is that the plus anterior sounds t, d, and s are gaining that co-articulated cue of rounding, and this is leading them to be perceived as minus anterior or plus posterior, so we get pronunciations like ch, j, and sh. And so when they're perceived as minus anterior, they're also perceived as being plus strident. This is because all minus anterior obstruents also happen to be plus strident. So what this causes is for those who are perceiving these plus anterior consonants as minus anterior before W, they're developing a new sound changer rule which unifies these environments of having rounded approximants being preceded by anterior obstruents being perceived as minus anterior or posterior obstruents. So because of that rounding, the coronal obstruents are becoming posterior. So what they're doing is invoking a new rule where minus sonorant plus anterior minus distributed sounds, which are just T, D, S, and Z, are becoming minus anterior plus distributed plus strident. So ch, j, and sh, and in the context at the beginning of syllables before r and w. And this is due to the lip rounding that is spread from those approximants. So the remaining questions I have for this have to do with why aren't more speakers of English producing this rule in their productions? This seems to be mostly restricted to the eastern seaboard of North America, especially around New York City and Montreal. However, W and R are always rounded for North American English speakers. So why isn't that co-articulation of the rounding of W on the preceding obstruents causing them to perceived as posterior in other speakers of North American English? This also opens doors for questioning what other enhancement cues could trigger or already have triggered sound changes in English and other languages. So with that, I'll leave it there and open the floor to y'all's questions. If you have any questions about what I've shown today, or yeah.